You're listening to a Raconteur Studios podcast.
Hello and welcome to the After Hours Skin Clinic. I'm Dr Emma Craythorne, your host and consultant dermatologist, and this is the place where your skincare questions don't stop when the clinic closes. In today's mini episode, we're taking a deep dive into retinol. So this is a powerful ingredient and it has a lot of buzz around it, but there is a lot of confusion. We're going to break down what retinol is, how to use it, and what you can expect. Before we jump into today's episode, if you're enjoying these shows and love what we're doing here at the After Hours Skin Clinic, would you mind doing me a big favour and clicking subscribe? We're still pretty new to the podcasting world and it really helps us grow and reach more listeners just like you. Okay, let's dive in. I think if there's one skincare ingredient that there is very little debate on whether it has an action or not in the skin, it is retinol. We know that this has an effect on the skin and we know that it's used in the vast majority of all of the shelves that we see lined with serums and creams and lotions, all promising the same thing, youth in a bottle. But let's break this down a little bit first of all and understand exactly what retinol is. I want to present you with a little bit of a catch because retinol comes from the group of retinoids and not all retinoids are created equal. For years we've heard that retinol is this gold standard, and while it's a really fantastic ingredient, what most people don't realise is that retinol is not the same thing as retinoic acid or tretinoin. It also gets known as, just to be a bit more confusing. So retinol is something that can be bought over the counter and it's in all of those creams and lotions and potions I talked about, but it is not the same thing as retinoic acid or tretinoin. When we think about tretinoin, it truly is the medical version of the retinoid that has decades of clinical evidence behind it for treating lines, wrinkles, acne, melasma. But what we're trying to do today is understand, well, where does retinol actually fit into that if all of the real evidence comes from what's published, and that is tretinoin. So let's think, what is retinol? Retinol is a form of a vitamin A. And vitamin A exists in many different forms, but for skincare, it all comes down to how your skin is processing that vitamin A. And at the very, very top of the ladder, we have retinoic acid or tretinoin. That is the same thing. This is biologically active. It integrates identically in with our genes via these retinoic acid receptors in the skin, and it switches on collagen production, cell turnover, and regulating the pigment that we have. Retinol, which is the one that you can get readily over the counter, is 2 steps away from retinoic acid. So your skin has to oxidize it, first of all to retinaldehyde, and then oxidize it again to become retinoic acid. Now, typically that means that retinol, yes, it might be gentler on the skin, but it is definitely weaker on the skin and it takes a lot longer to work. There was a study that was carried out in 2007 and it found that 0.4% of retinol did improve fine lines after 24 weeks of use, but it wasn't anywhere near as effective as tretinoin, which is the drug form, which started to make a difference much more quickly. And that's why usually you will always see dermatologists talking about a real, measurable, clinically proven change, and that's typically with tretinoin. But that does not mean that retinol is useless, not at all. And it's a fantastic ingredient for those who are wanting to have a more milder option, for those who have more sensitive skin perhaps, and for those who are wanting to just start into the world of trying to reduce some fine lines and wrinkles, and they don't need to see dramatic results very, very quickly. When we think about these over-the-counter retinoids, we have retinol, which we've just described, which is 2 steps away from retinoic acid. And then we have the retinaldehyde, which is just one step away from the retinoic acid and is probably around about 11 times stronger than retinol itself. And then it's really important to understand that there are also other forms of retinoids called retinol esters. And these are things like retinol palmitate, retinol acetate, and retinol propionate. And they're 3 steps away from retinoic acid. And actually, these are the ones that have very minimal evidence of efficacy. So if I was to say to you, we're thinking about the retinoids as a full group, tretinoin is the gold standard, but you need a prescription for that. Beneath that, you've got your retinaldehyde, which is the strongest, followed by retinol, and under that, these retinol esters, which have much less evidence behind them. So I think one important thing to understand is that retinol is something that shouldn't be used to treat these medical conditions such as acne or melasma or severe photodamage. But for people who are wanting to start off using it for things like very mild photodamage or very mild wrinkling to the skin and they've got a long time to play with, then retinols or retinals are typically a very good start. It's really important to understand that a lot of the marketing that gets used around the retinols is actually extracted from the literature that's related to the medical form of this, the tretinoin. So you do have to be slightly mindful of what's being conveyed in the marketing as opposed to what the actual outcome of the results would be. As a dermatologist, most of my dermatology colleagues, if they're wanting to be using something for their photodamage, fine lines and wrinkles, it's tretinoin they'll be using to repair that photodamage as opposed to a retinol. But I don't want to diss retinols entirely because they definitely have their place. When it comes to starting off using a retinol, these are used at night time and they're typically applied to cover the area of the face and neck, and you would typically avoid the corners of the eyes, the corners of the nose and the corners of the mouth when you're first starting out. And retinol for many people can be a great place to start. You can often see they come in different percentage strengths. So starting with the lowest percentage strength would be important. So something like a 0.1% retinol and then working your way up slowly. And then after that, you might wish to graduate to using the retinal or the retinaldehyde. And for those people who have more severe photodamage and are really looking for dramatic results in terms of their lines and wrinkles, that is when a prescription grade tretinoin is the most important to be able to then seek out. But there is this ladder of effect. I think it's also important to probably understand that because your skin has to convert the retinol to the retinoic acid, if you put a whole lot of retinol on in one go, the skin actually won't be able to convert it all. If you stuck like 5% retinol on your face, your skin is not going to be able to work hard enough to convert all of that, and actually you'll just end up with irritant skin. Whenever I'm asked about suggestions for good retinols to try, I really like the Skinseuticals retinols. I also like the retinols that come from Medic 8, and these can often be very good starter retinols or retinals before you otherwise might need to move on to a prescription grade retinoid if that is the most appropriate thing for you. People will often say you can't use these in the summer. That's not true. You can very comfortably use your retinol in the summer, and actually you're putting on a really potent antioxidant at night time, so it might convey some benefit to the skin the following day because you've had this vitamin A on your skin from the night before. Certainly if we extrapolate that from the clinical tretinoin data, it could suggest that that might have some benefit. But you can use this in the summer, and using your SPF in the day actually will complement this really very well indeed. I do think it's very important to understand that when it comes to the medical conditions that retinol is not being used for those. It is the tretinoin or differin, which is another medical retinoid, which is used for conditions such as acne and melasma, and retinol doesn't have a place in the treatment of those. Sometimes you might actually see on a package with retinol, it might say the words encapsulated retinol, and that doesn't mean that the retinol is any stronger. It just means it's delivered more slowly to try and reduce irritation. So it's really important to understand that formulation really, really is key whenever it comes to retinol, because a poorly formulated retinol can be very, very irritating to the skin, whereas a well-formulated retinol, even at the same doses, can actually be tolerated very well. So I think that's very important to understand that formulation is also incredibly key whenever it comes to retinol, and trying to find the brands that you trust is also important to make sure you're getting the good retinols at the right doses in the right formulations. Retinol can be used with a number of other skincare ingredients, and one of the questions that you often get asked is, can it be used with glycolic acid and salicylic acid? And actually, these work pretty well together, particularly if you're somebody who is wanting to do as much as you can cosmeceutical wise without moving up to using our prescribed products for rejuvenating the skin. But if you're wanting to just buy the over-the-counter products, then actually often combining glycolic acid and retinol together can be very helpful. And cleansers containing salicylic acid and glycolic acid can be used to help declog, shall we say, those follicles, and also help the skin cells at the very top, the stratum corneum, to be turned over a little bit more quickly. And that can go quite well with using a retinol. Remember, all of these things are irritating. So if you're putting too many irritating things on the skin all at once, then for some people, their skin wouldn't be able to take it. My skin certainly wouldn't be able to take it because I've got a tendency to rosacea. And so the idea of using a glycolic acid and a salicylic acid, and then I use tretinoin, of course, the idea of using all of those together would be just far too much. So the ingredients can be combined together, but whether combining them together is the right thing for a person's skin is debatable. In the daytime, some people like to wear vitamin C, whereas your vitamin A is worn at nighttime. So you don't ever actually have to put these two on together at the same time. Although if you had to, it wouldn't matter. I think the most important thing is understanding what type of skin you have. You can do this by taking a free skin size test at www.clara.skin, and that will help you understand more about your skin in terms of what your skin barrier is like, what your collagen status is like, what the pigmentation status of your skin is like, and what the sebum production is like. If you're somebody who has a skin barrier that is compromised, then jumping straight in with a high strength retinol that's been poorly formulated would be pretty bad news. However, if you're somebody who's got a very resistant skin barrier, you're making a lot of oil in your skin and your collagen levels are a little bit dubious, then getting yourself on a higher strength of retinol is also important. So you don't want to waste time on low strengths if you've got, stuff that needs treated quickly, but equally you don't want to jump in with all guns blazing into a very timid skin type that's going to react and become very irritated quickly. So understanding what type of skin you have first is the most important thing. And from that, then you can start to introduce your retinoid. And of all of the retinoids I described today, it's important to get to the right one for you. So that's why all of these things that talk about very generic skin information can be quite difficult, because what is right for one person is not necessarily right for another. And as we move into the world of personalised medicine, really personalised skincare is also key, and finding out what your skin is like itself will help you to get the results very quickly. If you're thinking of introducing a retinol into your skincare routine, you've never done that before, well, go and take this free skin size test. It takes you about 20 minutes to do that at www.clara.skin. Then you'll understand your skin, and then you'll be able to work out what the right kind of retinol is to use and how you can formulate that into your skincare routine. One of the questions that gets asked a lot is about the use of retinol and retinol during pregnancy. I remember whenever I was pregnant, and I just kind of stayed away from as much of everything as possible, even things that were otherwise very normal, like a cup of tea I would stay away from. So I understand that people get very nervous about what they're putting into their bodies and what they're putting under their skin, and rightfully so, because we're responsible for caring for this newly developing human. But a lot of what we put on our skin is never systemically absorbed. And there was a big study that looked at tretinoin, which is the medical version of retinoid. And actually, even in large quantities, it was not absorbed into the skin. That said, tretinoin still has a warning on it that it should not be used in pregnancy. Retinol does not carry that same warning, so it can be used in pregnancy. A lot of people just choose not to because of the fear, I suppose, of it being connected to tretinoin and that thought that there might be a concern. But actually looking hard and fast at the data, even using something like tretinoin, the absorption of that into the system is not there. But if you're using retinol, there is no warning on that. You can use it in pregnancy, but tretinoin you cannot. Everyone always wants to know, well, how will I know that my skincare is actually working and doing the job that I wanted to do? So the key is to just add in maybe one thing at a time to understand that if there's been a change in your skin and how it's behaving, then it's down to that ingredient or that particular formulation. So with tretinoin, the medical version of retinoid, we have very clear timelines as to when we see changes in the skin. So usually at around about 6 weeks, the skin will start to be more glowy. In other words, it reflects light better. And that's because the stratum corneum, that very top layer of the outermost part of the skin, has become more compacted and reflects light in a better way. Usually at around about 3-4 months, you start to see a slight disappearance in those very, very fine lines. And that's because you're seeing a thickness in the epidermis. And the epidermis is that top part of the skin just below the stratum corneum, full of living cells that thickens up. And it means that that slight crepiness that you can sometimes see on the skin, it clears because the epidermis has become thicker. And then at around about 9 months to 12 months, if you're on the high strength of the tretinoin, and by that I'm talking 0.05% or 0.1%, which is what the studies show, that is when you then start to see the thickening in the dermis, so that middle part of the skin. And that's where collagen is being made, hyaluronic acid is being made, and that dermal part becomes thicker. So that whole process takes about a year. You have to remember that retinol is much weaker than tretinoin, and it's probably much weaker by a factor of at least 20. So it will take a much longer time to see those kind of changes. So if we're thinking it takes a year to see that with a prescription grade retinoid, you know, I'm not going to say it's going to take 20 years to have the same effect with a retinol, but it's going to take a much longer time. So I think for anybody who is wanting to introduce and have never introduced any form of retinoid, a well-formulated retinol would be a very good start and to try and help to reduce the rate at which the skin is aging. Obviously that in company with your SPF, they are key. I often see skincare trends that are really aimed at teenagers and even younger than teenagers. And retinol is not really designed for this group of people at all. It's really designed probably for more people that are in their mid to late 20s, where the very earliest signs of photo damage and skin aging are just started to be shown. So it's around about that time is whenever people might start to wonder how they can keep their skin looking as young as possible for as long as possible. But as people progress through the ages, by the time they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, then often the dramatic changes that you might want to see in your skin, that's not likely to be triggered off by retinol, and usually a stronger kind of retinoid is often required for these more photo-damaged cases. And that's a wrap for today's episode. I hope you've learned a little bit more about this molecule, retinol, and where it should sit in a skincare routine. And as always, if you have any questions or topics you'd like me to cover in future episodes, don't hesitate to reach out on Instagram at @AfterOurSkinClinic or send us an email to ahsc@raconteur.tv. All of the details are in the show notes. Do take a moment to subscribe, rate and leave a review. It really helps other people find the show. Thanks so much for listening. Take care of yourself and your skin. Wear your SPF and we'll see you next time at the After Hours Skin Clinic. As always, this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not a substitute for medical advice. Please consult your healthcare professional before making a change to your treatment.